In a world full of corruption and political struggles, the voice of the weak is often left unheard. When people rebel against governments, it is time to pick your side. Join the forces of newly created government and help them rise, or ally with the loyalist forces aided by the intervention of one of the neighboring countries. Hello everyone, and welcome to Free Indie Games presented by Cliqist.com. Tanks of Freedom is a frustrating game. Sure, it looks pretty if you're into pixel art anyway, but beyond that, it's completely ruined by bad controls, a terrible camera, lackluster gameplay, and so many more problems. Tanks of Freedom is a turn-based action RPG similar to Advance War, which is a subgenre that's kind of been blowing up lately with Tiny Metal late last year, and Wargroove and Into the Breach coming later this year. Developer P1X hopes Tanks of Freedom joins that list as a hopeful replacement for the beloved series, but it's just not good enough. I don't even know where to begin with this. I'm sure most people know what Advance Wars is, and this pretty much is exactly the same. Even if you don't know, then I'm sure you've heard of Tiny Metal or even those other two, or you can at least tell by looking at it what it is. So I'm not going to bother explaining the game because it really is identical to its forebear. Instead, we'll start with the worst this game has to offer, the camera. You see, it can't be controlled manually, not at all. The only way to move the camera is by moving your units across the map as the camera auto-locks on to whichever unit you have selected. The only way you really get any good idea of what's going on around you is by sending out 100 units all across the map and then just cycling through them one at a time. Otherwise, you won't be able to see anything. This is made worse by the fact that the camera is super zoomed in, and I couldn't find any way to zoom out. That's mostly because the option menu only gives you the control scheme for gamepads, with no mention of mouse and keyboard in sight. Oh, you can play with the mouse and keyboard, but you're gonna have to figure out the controls for yourself there, buddy boys and girls. You'd think that the many tutorial messages that pop up at the start of every single level, no matter how far you make it into the game, would tell you, but alas, they just regurgitate the same basic info ad nauseum. Even if the camera controls were fixed though, Tanks of Freedom just doesn't have much to offer. It's incredibly basic, even for a free indie game. You move units around the grid, if you wait long enough you can build more units, and you capture bases to win, and that's it. There's a kind of story, but it's told entirely through text boxes at the start of the game, and it isn't desperately well realized or well written anyway. Another part is the base capturing itself. Again, all you need to do to win is capture enemy bases, meaning you can ignore the enemies entirely, bum rush their base, capture it, and congratulations, you're General MacArthur. You're better off doing this too, because you have no real control over how fights go. It's no surprise you can't take over individual units or anything like that, that's not really how these games go. But the problem is, every time you attack an enemy unit with one of yours, the unit you're attacking will always counterattack, doing an equal amount of damage to you. This throws whatever remnants of strategy this game had out the window, as the only thing that matters in combat is how many units you have, not positioning or high ground or ambushes or anything like that. Just about the only thing Tanks of Freedom has going for it is how the dev team is approaching this. The game is in full development still and will likely be released on Steam or whatever when it's done. They're also sharing the source code with everybody, and the team has freely invited you to mess with it however you want. There's also an in-game map editor, which is nice, but the fact of the matter is, Tanks of Freedom still needs a lot of work before it can even come close to imitating Advance Wars, and with the aforementioned Tiny Metal already out, and Wargroove and Into the Breach just around the corner, I don't really see much point in this game.